Greetings to you all and welcome to Back to Ashes. I am your host, Phoenix. I would like to take a moment and thank the elite members of Back to Ashes. You have my deepest gratitude. Thank you for your loyal support. If you would like to learn more about Back to Ashes, please check the description box below, and if you would like to keep up with the channel, please check the community tab on the main page. Without further ado, it is time to sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Ouija and Ghost Stories. Right after this intro, an ad will play, or read the first story an ad will play, and after that there will be no more ads within this video. Disclaimer, this video is for educational and entertainment purposes. My older brother had received a Ouija board one year as a Christmas present during the early 70s. I don't ever remember him using it, so it mainly stayed in his closet. One night, my friend and I decided to see what it was about. We were between 10 to 12 years of age. After some typical girl questions like, will I get a boyfriend soon, etc., to what are the initials of who I will marry? The little thing moved, but we laughed and thought one or the other had moved it. After that, we didn't mess with it, and eventually the Ouija board and its box got put in the garage. When I got older, in my late teens, I had read or someone told me that the Ouija board was evil. So I got rid of it by putting it in the trash can the morning of trash day. Did not think about it till I went into the garbage a couple of days later and saw the Ouija box with the board still inside, back on the shelf in the garage. At first, I thought one of my brothers saw it on top of the trash can and put it back, but both denied it as my parents did. So no one took it out of the trash and put it into the garage. And believe me, I questioned both my brothers, but both were adamant they hadn't put it back. I put the box again in the trash on trash day, and no one was home but me that day. I heard the trash truck come and go, and after a while, an eerie feeling came over me. So I went and checked inside the garage, and guess what was back on the shelf? Yes, the box containing the Ouija board. Next trash day, I waited for the trash truck to pull up to our house, and I threw the box and the board into the trash bin of the truck. And to this day, I still believe that that Ouija board was pure evil. I want to apologize to any one of my family members who might think I am implying that this thing was in any way my sister. My sister was unique, very funny, special, and the most loving person, but she did have a very dark side. We all knew that. My sister was the eldest of 6, 5 girls, 1 boy. She had a spirit friend at a young age and had quite intelligent conversations with her. My mother even asked her to ask her friend things she never would have known the answer to, and it floored my mother when she gave her friends very mature responses. She told me later that she felt like her friend was there because she needed her at the time after she grew older. Her friend told her it was time for her to go. She lived through the hardest times with my mother. My mother's very abusive marriages, divorces, and never changing locations and lifestyle. In some ways, I think it made my sister feel very protective over my mother, almost borderline obsessive in doing anything in her power to get my mother's approval, even if it hurt one of us in some way, as we believe she resented us for taking Mom's attention. I think she resented my brother the most for being the only boy in the family and getting all of the praise that came with that role. It broke my mother's heart when he got married and moved away. So, needless to say, that my sister wasn't too fond of his wife and made every attempt to distance my mother in his relationship. Then it was our second eldest sister because she was always getting into trouble for attention, growing up and even into adulthood, constantly stressing her mother out, and myself because I was the baby of the family. My mother and I had a very special bond nobody could break. My sister had always been a little unstable, but there was a shift. Things just changed up at the house on Alexandria. I slept with my mother there, and then remembered night after night she would sit on the edge of my mother's side of the bed, projecting negativity and expressing delusional problems for things that hadn't even happened until my mother would cry for her to stop. It could have been that something may have attached itself to her there, but I don't know. Fast forward to the end of my sister's life. My mother passed away at the age of 87 from cancer, leaving my sister feeling alone, not wanting to live anymore. She would never take her own life, but she longed to be with our mother in the afterlife. So bad, she had been suffering for a long time with her own medical issues, while Mom was alive, but now she felt like there was nothing left to fight for. So, if she just stopped her treatment, the end would come. We all tried to bring her home with us, but she just wasn't having it. She suffered from paranoia and wanted to stay in that cold, empty place. She would just sit there, holding my mom's things, staring off into the distance like she was simply waiting. I was there one night, helping like many nights before, when she asked me to come sit close to her. She said it was very important, so I moved closer. She told me that she worried she was at the end of her life, and she felt like she needed my forgiveness. She said that she had done things, bad things. I told her that we have all done things we are not proud of, but she insisted that what she had done was not good, and it manipulated many outcomes in life. She looked very worried. She would not tell me what these things were, but I'm pretty sure I knew, and they did have impact in my life in a negative way. She said that for many years, she had felt a dark presence cloud in her thoughts. She opened her hand, spreading her fingers, and hovered her hand over the top right side of her head, and said right there, I had always felt something around her as well, but I only told my mother about my concerns. At the end of her days, she suffered greatly. I wasn't there when she passed. That was 2 states away, so one of my sisters sent me a picture of her in her final days. She was propped up in her hospital bed, with her eyes wider than I had ever seen them, staring up to the right above her head, right where she had said she felt that dark presence. This is not just a glazed stare. This looked straight up like fear. I called and asked the nurse how long she had been staring like that, and she told me that it had been so long. They started using eye drops so her eyes wouldn't dry out. What was she looking at? It haunts me to this day. The night she passed, it was late, so I waited until morning to tell my brother. He didn't seem surprised and asked me what time she took her last breath. He said he had a feeling, and with that, I replied, "How so?" He proceeded to tell me that after he turned the light out and closed his eyes, something dark rushed at him. He said it was cold and frightening, and all of a sudden, her face came to his mind, and it felt like her. He just knew she had passed. Oh man, did that ever freak me out. A few days later, my second to the eldest sister and my brother's ex-wife, they lived together, called me telling me that things crashed in their bathroom at 5 in the morning, and the dog would not stop growling at the top corners of the room. They asked me if I could help them cleanse their apartment, so I did. Now I'm thinking that I am the next one on the list, but nothing happened. Almost a week goes by and I'm laying in bed. My grandchildren sleep with me. My grandson looks up towards my bedroom door and says, "No, no, no, spooky." He was 4 at the time. I did not even look. I told him that it was all right and that the bed was covered in white light. and we were protected. I moved my hand as if I had a magic wand and was covering us with a blanket. He sat up and looked around and said, "Oh, thank you," and went to sleep, and so did I. My son and his fiancée, on the other hand, did not go to sleep at all that night. Now I keep a very bright nightlight on in my room, so there was no explanation for this. I live in an old farm-style-like house with a loft upstairs where my son has his room. The door to the stairs go to the kitchen facing my room. My son said that he and his fiancée came downstairs to the kitchen. They both looked toward my room to see if I was up, but in the doorway, they described it as light-absorbing darkness. They both stood there in disbelief, stricken with fear, trying to see into my room. It was almost as if whatever it was couldn't get in there, but it was standing there just feet from the bed. It stayed there for a while, then went away. Later that month, my grandchildren and I drove to my mother and sister's home to put all of their remaining belongings into storage. And that's when we were met with that same darkness that shook us to the core. It left me questioning life events from the past. Was it this thing that made her that way? And did it have a hand in changing the course in our lives? Or was what we saw in that house something else altogether? I hope she finds peace. I find it strange that everyone in my family, in one way or another, has experienced something warm and loving with my mother. A touch on the hand, a stroke on the cheek, or back followed sometimes by the smell of her perfume. But no one at all has been visited by my loving sister. It breaks my heart to think that we don't really know what is on the other side. Is she being held somewhere and we can't help her? Or did she simply just move on? I hope it's the latter. Someone brought something up that made me think. I have to agree. He said, "It sounds like it lost your sister when she died. That's why it's been showing up at other families' homes. It was looking for a new host, but it seems none of you were in a dark enough place for it to force an attachment. When she passed, one of my sisters stayed, whispering spiritual affirmations, quietly suggesting she go into the light until she was gone, and that gave me peace." Back in 2008, I was just shy of my 18th birthday and living in a sober house in Boulder, Colorado. The property was over 100 years old, and for the first 80-odd years had operated as a University of Colorado sorority house. It was putatively one of the most haunted buildings in the state. Multiple people had died there. One girl had hung herself in the basement bathroom, and someone else had fallen out of the top floor window. These are the two incidents I can remember. At the time, I was a huge Doors fan and was eager to contact Spirit under the rubric of breaking on through to the other side. I went out to some game stores on Pearl Street, the kind of place that sold billiards and crap tables and all kinds of man cave and rumpus room furnishings, and bought a Ouija board. With the weekly allowance I earned, performing janitorial duties back at the house. The bathroom the girl had hung herself in was adjoined to the basement laundry room, sealed behind a painted door and co-signed for years to destitute and disrepair. I forced the door open one afternoon and immediately felt a nameless dread unspooling in the pit of my stomach. The room was plunged into darkness, save a fatigued, gauzy light filtering through a small curtained window. The toilet had been duct-taped shut. In the bathtub was about an inch of some congealed black dreck that had wicked its way up the drain pipe. I had willed my boyfriend, counselor, and two housemaids into participating in the seance, and though the bathroom was, in my estimation, the locus of whatever sloughed-off psychic activity remained in the house, it was too small to accommodate all 5 of us. I chose, instead, a small adjacent room with a drum kit and closet. I laid out a candle and some other offerings, a nexus to the material world, and we all took our seats around the Ouija board. Almost instantly, the thing began to move. I remember asking the spirit its name, to which it spelled out, ESTHER. I then asked if the spirit was comfortable with our presence, a tinsel series of hesitant movements, and the most rancorous atmosphere of hostility settled around us. The room grew cold, and the closet door began reeling open into the room. My boyfriend, Josh, who'd taken the most convincing to get down there, bolted upright and in a curt, petrified tone said, "That's enough for me." After blowing out the candle and abandoning the seance, I found him chain-smoking on the back porch, looking beleaguered. After this came an onslaught of unexplainable phenomena, culminating in a terrifying episode in which I felt a hand strafe my flank while lying in bed, and subsequently experienced some turbulent, negogic state of paralysis. I've never before or since experienced sleep paralysis, in which my entire field of vision was occluded by a kind of living shadow. I told my therapist the next day, a spiritualist lesbian from Texas who wore leather pants, smoked filterless American spirits, and went about everywhere accompanied by a geriatric dachshund named Marty. "Gemini," she scolded me. "I told you not to go fucking around with the other side. Now we've got to close it up." She marched me up to my room and opened a window, burned sage, recited some Vajrayana chants, and invited the spirit to leave. After this, everything ceased. I've made no attempt since to effect a collision with whatever worlds exist parallel to ours. My curiosity has been sated, to say the least. I'll start off by saying no, this isn't my story, but it was such a crazy encounter that I have since asked each of my friends throughout the years to recount the events. This happened around the year 2000. About a year after this took place, I started dating one of these friends, and that's when I first heard about this dog-wolf story. I have since asked each friend, over years and miles apart, and they all remember the same encounter. Before my ex was even my boyfriend, let's just call him Jay, he and our other friends were about 17 to 18 years old. At that age, I remember it being an adventure to find a place to smoke. Let's hike to whatever, and puff. Ah, the good old days. The 4 of them decided to drive to Mount Pisgah, a beautiful wooded area outside of Eugene, Oregon. It's more of a hill, but its nature is in its prime for sure. I've been out there many times growing up, and I know exactly what trail they were on. It was Jay and his best friend B, and their girlfriends S and M. They had driven in B's little white sedan, parked in the parking lot, and hiked the trail to the river, where they smoked some bowls. The group spent the day out there, swimming and puffing and swimming, just being typical Oregonian teens. I can imagine that hunger is what drove them to go home after a few hours as the sun began to set. Either activity alone is bound to get someone hungry, let alone both. So they walked along the well-worn main dirt path to the parking lot. This has since been paved, as I saw on Google Maps. It doesn't take but 20 minutes or so for them to get back to the little footbridge by the parking lot that they had crossed when they hiked in. When they reached the small footbridge near the parking lot, B looked out into the vast field between them and the wooded mountain and noticed a huge dog. They all later described it as the biggest dog they had ever seen. The dog was just sitting there, not looking scary, just looking like a humongous friendly doggy about 70 yards away. It was starting to get dark, but from M's description and the drawing she did for me later in 2005, it was a very shaggy and furry dog. My friends continued to walk across the small wooden bridge, and one of the girls screamed. The big dog was now on its hind legs, standing much closer than when they had seen it just a couple of seconds earlier. It had traversed most of the large field in the seconds it took them to get across the 10-foot-long bridge. Whatever this thing was, it was fast, quiet, and stealthy. My 4 friends ran to the car, and they had the classic cliche, "I can't get my key in," because B was fumbling madly for the keys. At this point, the dog was standing at the very edge of the parking lot, looking at them. As my ex Jay had said, every time they looked up, he was closer, but not moving. All of them recounted how surreal it was to see a dog standing on its hind legs. I don't know if it ran for a few ticks and then stood up again at intervals in the field, but that's the way they describe it. Many times I asked them, "Are you sure it wasn't a bear?" No, it definitely was a dog standing on hind legs, a big dog that was stalking them. Also, this is in Lane County, Oregon, in the year 2000. There are few, if any, bears out there. It would have been cold, but then again, I wasn't there. The kids got into the car and sped off, leaving the pig's butt dog to its own business. I've never had a reason to doubt any of their stories. In fact, S doesn't like to talk about the incident at all because it's just too creepy for her to recall. I'm a mail carrier. I know. Super interesting, right? Honestly, you'd be surprised at the amount of weird shit that happens to us. I've had people follow me while I'm delivering and try to get into my delivery vehicle to steal shit. I've had a customer vomit on my car after she opened a parcel her husband sent her that was meant to go to his mistress. I've had delivered dildos that fell out of their flimsy packages. Dragon dildos, no less. I have seen people having sex near my more secluded boxes, and they don't stop for me. This is the kind of stuff that typically happens to us, contract carriers. For those who don't know, contract carriers are mail carriers who buy a contract for a mail route that is typically in a rural area that, from what I understand, the fancy mail jeeps cannot traverse. So we use our own vehicles to deliver the mail, and we are paid monthly based on what type of route, how long the route takes on a day-to-day basis, and what the post office deems as fair. Technically, we are self-employed, but still have to abide by the rules of the post office, and we still have to become certified to even touch the mail. But of course, being in the areas that we are in most of the time, that kind of weird shit I mentioned above happens all the time. Those things happened to me when I was a sub, someone who works for a contract holder, but does not own the route in any way. I was paid by the person who owns the route out of their own pocket. Now, however, I am the somewhat disgruntled owner of a 10-year route contract for the first time. I've owned the contract for about 7 months. It's a pretty easy gig. The route itself takes about 2.5 hours to case, sort the mail for delivery, and another good 3 to 4 hours to deliver on a good day. 5 to 6 on super heavy days. I'm not looking forward to how the holidays fare on this route. Thing is, before I got the contract, I had to decide what I was bidding on. The way someone gets a contract is that they bid for it. The person bidding will give a monthly salary amount that they feel would be fair-ish for the route in question. The post office and bid holders then decide which amount is the most accurate, in their oh-so-wise opinion, for the route, and they give it to whoever has that amount. I was lucky enough to get it, so I get a pretty damn good pay that I technically chose for myself. All I knew of the route was that it went down into the valley. I live in a very small desert city with some very wide, outlying mini communities. These outliving areas are where the majority of our offices contract route drivers to. My route goes 25 miles out of town to a lot of small ranching properties in the closer areas and to some pretty scattered random loner properties in the farthest areas. There are a lot of hills and dirt roads where I go. It's very easy to get lost out there if you don't know what you are doing. There's one area in particular that goes through a small forest nestled between a random outcropping of hills heading out onto the state highway. It's not like an evergreen forest or anything of the sort. That's just the closest definition I can give. They're not really trees as much as gigantic bushes that nestle together very closely on either side of the road. That is towards the end of the route, but it takes up a good chunk of my customer addresses. When I was training, the previous owner of the route, I'll call him Jim, gave me a rundown of the people who live on the route. There are a lot of ranch owners, of course, and they are the ones who get the most parcels. This isn't surprising to me since they're the richest people out there. We, of course, call that section the ranches. There are the elderly retirees that live at a tiny retirement community set up by the city out there. It's pretty spread out, like a teeny tiny little town of their own. That's the area with the second most amount of parcels. Lots of random buying and sometimes gifts from relatives. We call that area the retirement homes. These are the customers I talk to the most. There's the outskirters, as Jim called them. These are the people who live so far off the grid that most of the time we don't deliver packages to them. As a general rule, we are not allowed to deliver boxes to a house if it is more than 3 miles from the mailbox. Most of them live about 5 to 6 miles from their mailboxes. Their boxes are in long lines, or clusters as we call them, on the side of the road. As a courtesy to these customers, I ask them to give me their phone number so I can call them if they have a parcel, and they meet me at the box. Most of them don't mind, and I'm grateful to them. Because a lot of those roads are treacherous, I once tried to be nice and deliver a box to one of them and got stuck, unable to move my car for almost 4 hours as I lost service. Eventually, they found me, and that's when they gave me their number at last. They don't get many boxes, though, in that part of the route. Then, there's what Jim called the ghost town. It's not really a town, per se, but more of the secluded homes like the previous area. But these guys are closer to the road, and they're the ones who live in the forest I mentioned above. He called it the ghost town for a good reason. These people are either never home, as most of them are snowbirds, or the ones who are very creepy. And there are a few homes out there that are usually vacant. More snowbirds that have a lot going on. For the stories I'm about to tell you, there are 3 homes involved. 2 of them are in the ghost town. The other one takes place in the outskirters area. The last one is the worst, so I'm saving it for the last. There's more, honestly, but these are by far the most interesting as far as history and the stuff that happened. I'm telling them in order of intensity. By that, I mean I start with the tamest and move up as they get a bit more intense, whether by their history or what happens there. I'll give each house a name here, since I pretty much do at work anyway. It's how I remember their address without really having to think about it. Real names have been changed for my customers' privacy. Number 1, the Bailey Cluster. The Bailey Cluster is a grouping of homes in the ghost town that belongs to a single family with the name of Bailey. The mailboxes are all nestled together on the side of the road against some of those large bushes in the forest. Just before the mailboxes, there are 4 total, is a small dirt road that leads up to their property. The whole road has to be about 4 feet across. That's how it feels, because when you're driving up, the bushes on either side will scrape the side of my car. I've gotten more than a few scratches because of them. I've asked them to trim down their bushes, but they never do, so I just gave up. When you get to the property, you're met with a large 6-foot-tall rusted iron gate with the name Bailey fashioned out of bent-up horseshoes and pipes welded to the top of it. As a general rule, if a gate is shut, we are never encouraged to try and open it to drive in. We aren't really supposed to walk in if it's shut either, unless the customer has told us it's okay. For the Baileys, I get out and walk their parcels through the gate and up to the first house, which isn't far from the gate. I have to state now, I've never once met these people in person. I've spoken to them on the phone, and I've been on their property, but I've never once seen hide nor hair of any of them. There are a total of 10 people at the address, and their mail is split up as if their homes are in like a trailer park. For example, one of them gets their mail at 1111 Ghost Town Road, Mobile Number 1, Little Desert Town, State 88888, and the other will get it at Mobile Number 2, Number 3, or Number 4. There are 4 people in Number 1, 2 in Number 2, 1 person in Number 3, and the others are all in Number 4. Every time I bring them a parcel, I leave it at the first house. Once you walk through their gate, you have to walk uphill a bit. You can see the teal green roof of the first house peeking up over the hill as you walk. And when you get closer, it becomes apparent why the place is so unsettling. Clowns. These people love clowns. There are clown statues, paintings, mobiles, wind chimes, you name it. It has a fucking clown face on it. They even have clown dolls scattered around the place. None of them look nice. They're all threadbare and worn out from sitting in the hot desert sun all the time. I'm pretty sure animals have made homes inside some of them. There are a few that are big enough to house a small family of squirrels. Now, I know this isn't paranormal. Yet, I'm getting there, I promise. But you have to admit, that's more than a little odd. The first house is a simple single-wide mobile with a bright teal green painted roof. The windows all have clown decals in them. Little clown faces that look like they're straight out of a vintage coloring book. Hand-colored and everything. At one end of the place is the porch. Not too big, just out about 6 or 7 feet. There's a small awning with dozens of clowns, wind chimes, and sun catchers hanging from it, almost making a curtain out of them. They're so clustered together. On the porch is a rocking chair. This thing is painted like a clown. The curved rockers are painted red. The legs that attach them to the chair are yellow with red polka dots. The seat and arms are white, and the back is white with 3 big red dots painted on it like puffballs on a clown shirt. The top part of the back has a clown face on it. Put it all together, and it's a fucking nightmare. This chair is where I'm asked to leave parcels, and I do. But I'll never forget the first time I left them there. There were 4 boxes of them, 1 for number 1 and the rest for number 3. I called ahead of time to let them know I'd be out there in about 3 hours, since they're towards the end of the route. It takes longer to get to them. I'm always told, by who I assume is their matriarch, to leave them all on that damn chair. I'd never been up to their property at this point. I've been delivering about a month, but only had mail in small parcels that fit in the box for them. So when I get up there for the first time, seeing their little clown cluster was a bit nerve-wracking. I am terrified of clowns, have been since I was a child, but that's a story for another time as to why. I crept up to that first house and peered around the place. It's so isolated and odd. I feel like every single clown around me was watching me. I placed the boxes on the chair in a neat little pile and settled the chair to stop it from rocking so the boxes wouldn't fall off. Once it was still, I turned and hastily tried to leave. It was the creaking that stopped me. I froze and listened, knowing full well what it was. I turned, and sure as shit, that chair was rocking. And not just a little, but enough to knock one of the boxes onto the porch. It was like someone had deliberately pulled it all the way back and thrust it forward to rock as violently as possible. I didn't hesitate. I just ran. I noped the hell out. I'm not staying after that. Another time I had a parcel for them. I almost wrote it up out of protest, but I called and again was asked to leave it on the chair. This is the time I noticed that it felt like no one was there. I'd been there a dozen times by then. I remember standing at the top of the hill by the gate, just peering around me like, where is everyone? According to their mail, there are at least a few children that live there. And when I was there that day, it was the middle of summer. Why weren't the kids home, playing outside? Why didn't I ever see anyone there? The second and third houses are a bit far away from the first house. It'd be about a 5-minute walk, I think, to get to them. But you can see them pretty well. Their curtains are always open, but I never see anyone inside. The fourth house is furthest away at the top of a small hill. They have a big picture window facing the gate. It too always has the curtains open, but I never see anyone there. Weirdest of all, their vehicles are always there. They never move. There are 2 trucks, an SUV, all relatively newish, oldest I think it's 2012, and an old station wagon. The wagon looks run down, but the others look like they're taken care of, almost clean. Anyway, this other time I had a parcel and noticed no one is ever around. I got curious and phoned the woman. I always do when bringing parcels. I figured I'd just tell her I was making sure someone would be back soon to get the parcel, as there's a lot of theft out that way. There usually is on more secluded routes. You'd be surprised at how much more common it is out there than in the city. I heard a phone ringing in the first house beside me. If I'm on the porch, I can peek into the window just behind the evil rocking chair. It was closed. The phone that was ringing, I mean. And I wanted to see someone pick it up. I squeezed myself behind the chair and looked in. I'd never looked inside before. More clowns, of course, and some clown-themed throws on the couch and pillows, too. On a side table, clearly visible from the window, I could see the cell phone light up with Mail Lady as the caller ID. No one answered, but when I left, she called me back. I had been gone about 5 minutes when she did. I just told her I wanted to be sure someone was home. She said someone is always here. According to Jim, he never saw anyone there either. The third and final most interesting thing to ever happen at the Bailey cluster was just last month. I got a very large box for them, one I needed a dolly for. I called before I even left the post office to let them know, and the lady I always speak to told me she would have her oldest son help me. I thought, finally, I'll get to meet one of them. This ought to be good, right? Well, I get there. It's my last package, and then I was free to breeze through the final 50 or so boxes I have after them. I have a total of 670 boxes on my route, by the way. I go to the back, pull out the dolly, slide the box out onto it, and start dragging it up to the gate. I look around, and no one to meet me, of course. The lady told me he'd be waiting for me on the porch of the first house, and when he saw me, he'd come down and help. You can see the gate from the porch pretty well, but I can never see my car from it. So I honked just in case he couldn't see me either. No one came down. I waited for about 5 minutes before saying, "Screw it, I'm taking it up." I struggled up the hill with it. I don't know what was in that box, but I'm pretty sure it weighed like 75 pounds. The post office has a 70-pound weight limit that a lot of companies try to stretch to 75 or 80. Usually they go to UPS, but sometimes they slip through the cracks and come to us. I get to the first house, and of course, no one is there. I look around, and as usual, I'm all alone with a bunch of fucking clown dolls gaping at me. I wiggle the box up the stairs on the dolly and lean it against the railing, next to the rocking chair. It's way too big to sit on it and head down to my car. That's when I hear, "Thank you," from behind me, in a man's voice. I assumed it was the son who was supposed to help me. I quickly run back up the hill, and not only is there no one there, but the box is gone from the porch. This was the span of like 10 seconds. I wasn't even down the hill all the way. It doesn't take that long to walk back down. I looked in the window and everything. I didn't see a soul. I hate going to the Bailey cluster, and I end up going there a lot. Number 2, the Blood House. This place is the one that gives me the most creeps. While I was training, Jim told me about this place. This is another snowbird place where the people only live there between October and March. They were there when I started, and they came back at the beginning of this month. Super nice people. I really like them. But I don't have a clue why they live there. Jim told me that back in the early 1990s, when he first started working for the post office, the guy who used to do the route before him told him the story. According to him, there was a family of 5 that lived there. All of them were absolutely crazy. The mom had schizophrenia and would apparently abuse the kids because of the voices. The father was no better. He was a worthless drunk who just sat by while his crazy wife hurt the kids. One night, the eldest child, who was 18 and finally fed up with how they were raised, tried to escape with his siblings. The mother, of course, tried to stop them, and the kid finally snapped. He murdered his parents and painted the walls with their blood. The incident changed him, and while his siblings escaped, he stayed in the house with his parents' corpse until he ended up slitting his own throat and tried painting the floor in his blood before succumbing to the blood loss and dying himself. They weren't found for months. The place was cleared out, torn down and rebuilt, and the guy who built the new house was compelled to paint the house red. It's not obnoxiously red, but it's too red, if that makes sense. There's no long driveway up to this place. It just sits right on the road at the end of the ghost town. The end is literally a dead-end road, and they're right there at the tail end of it, where signs tell you to turn around. The current owners, we will call them Mr. and Mrs. Nice because they're nice and I'm not that creative at the moment, have told me countless horror stories about living there. Sometimes I think they get some sort of sick thrill out of it. When they're not there, I forward everything, but I have to pass their house to get to the turnaround spot, and their neighbors always have mail, so I go by them no matter what. I've seen some really weird shit out there, but every time I pass the blood house, I just get this awful feeling of dread. Whenever I did deliver packages to them, I'd step out of the car and just standing at the edge of the driveway feels like standing at the edge of a cliff. I feel like stepping onto their property is like jumping off to my death. It's terribly unsettling. I honestly don't know how they stay there for as long as they do. I mean, they leave for 6 months out of the year, so I guess for them it might not be too bad, but if I feel that way just delivering packages once in a while, I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me. Mrs. Nice told me to always watch the third window from the left because that's where the son who went mad likes to sit. She calls him Tommy, even though that wasn't his real name. She feels it suits him. She talks about him like he's her own son. I think she pities him. She believes his soul is trapped there because of all the terrible things that happened to him. When she first told me, my reaction was, no thanks. But one day, the temptation got the best of me, and I looked. When you're at their mailbox, you can see into all of their windows. The house is a long, one-story place with 6 windows, 3 on either side of their small front door. Of course, the house is red, but the trim and door are all white. The window in question is the one that sits right next to the front door on the left. Mrs. Nice told me that's the front guest room. So I looked, and I couldn't believe my eyes. I didn't see a full-bodied apparition or anything like that, but I definitely saw a face, and it looked so anguished, like, you know the happy and sad masks that you see for drama and theater? It looked like the sad mask, just pained. I blinked and the face was suddenly gone, and the curtain, which was open, had been closed. Another time, I walked up to the house to put a package by the door. The Nices weren't home that day. The truck was gone, so I decided I would put the package around the back and leave a note in their box to let them know since I didn't have a number for them at the time. When I walked around the back, I put the package over the small fence into their backyard. Once I did, I turned and I felt myself run into something. But there wasn't anything in front of me. Nothing but air. But I swear I felt something in front of me. I didn't want to move forward. It was like an invisible wall had erected before me. And while I couldn't see it, I knew that if I went any further, I'd get hurt. It just felt oppressive and strange. I actually backed up into the house and slid along the wall all the way to the front. And whatever invisible force was there, I felt like it followed me. I actually began to cry because I felt like there was a person just pressing up against me as I moved, like they were trying to force me back. Once I hit the edge of the house, I ran. I ran to my car and sped away. I cried most of the way back because it was just so, I don't know what else to say, but terrifying. When I told Mrs. Nice about it the next time I saw her, she said Tommy likes to do that. He tries to intimidate people. He does it to Mr. Nice all the time, apparently. Around the 3rd week after the Nices left for the summer home, I passed the house and swore I saw someone standing at the mailbox. But it wasn't solid. It was like a blurred outline of a person when I got closer. As I passed, the head seemed to turn with me as I drove. Watching me, I do not like passing the house. I'm glad they're back for the winter. It makes me feel a bit more at ease to know that they're there. But I still don't like the idea of delivering packages to them. I do not want to be anywhere near Tommy. And of course, I've saved the worst for last. The Hills Have Eyes house. I hate this house. This is the one that isn't in the ghost town. This is in the section before it, the outskirters. These are the homes that are so scattered we usually won't bring parcels out for them because they're so far away. But this house is an exception because it's less than a mile from the cluster of boxes they get their mail out. These people are never home. Jim told me to never call them. They're apparently very rude and very hostile. He instructed me to just go to their gate. If they have a parcel, always bring the mail with it, or they'll call and complain. Leave the parcel in the basket that hangs on the fence with their mail in a rubber band and leave. He said to never linger there He told me that if I did, they get hostile. I do as I'm told, but thankfully, they've almost never been home. But something is. I know that sounds so cheesy, but it's true. I don't know the history of the place itself, just that these people are apparently the world's biggest pricks. 2 men live there, brothers from what Jim told me. They run a small chicken farm and bring their eggs to the feed store in town to sell all the time. It's not uncommon to see their chickens roaming around on the road leading up to the house. The road itself is barely a road. It's more like a bumpy little walking trail. But it's the only way to get there. And I know I've said it already, but God, I hate going there. I call it the Hills Have Eyes house because it's settled between 2 large hills. And from far away, the hills look like eyes and the house looks like a mouth. That and the way this place looks. It looks like something out of the movie The Hills Have Eyes. There's butchering equipment everywhere, bloody knives and cleavers and chains and hooks. They've got cows too, but I think they keep the meat for themselves. The smell is just atrocious. It always smells like death. To be honest, it wouldn't shock me if these guys committed murder out there and only butchered cows when they did it to make excuses for the stench of death. Every single time I go out there, something happens. I've been out there 6 times to deliver parcels, so I will recount each incident. The first time was about 3 months after I started delivering. I did as I was told, wrapped the mail in a rubber band and headed out to the house. Takes a good 3 or 4 minutes. It's around a bend, and then that's when you see the 2 other hills that the house sits between. The main house has a fence around it with a gate, but the whole property has an outer fence with no gate that I can go through. Once you're up against the gate, the whole place looks a lot smaller than it is because it's full of junk. All the butchering stuff, random metal sculptures, a bunch of worn-out furniture, garbage, a few cow skulls here and there, and then the house itself. The house is just a small trailer that's been cemented into the ground, so it's no longer mobile. A makeshift ramp and porch thing sits against the door and leads to a side gate. This is where the basket for packages is. All around this gated area are coops and other fenced areas for the animals. It's smelly and weird and creepy around there. I just tossed the box and mail into the basket and turned to leave. I didn't want to stay at all. When I got into my car, I looked in my rearview mirror and swear I saw a man standing behind my car. But when I poked my head out to ask him to move, there was no one there. And of course, I did not stay another second. The second incident was closer to the evening. It was another super heavy day, and I did not want to go out there. As I was approaching, I saw someone standing at the window of the house. I assumed it was one of them trying to see who was coming. I have car magnets on my car that all say USPS on them, so people know who I am. I figured he'd see them and be more at ease knowing a package was coming and not some random weirdo. But as I approached, the figure in the window seemed to distort and eventually vanish entirely. I did not want to get out of the car. I just wanted to stay there and toss the parcel and mail out the window. After working up the courage, I sped from the car to the basket, back, and I went to leave. As I was getting into the car, I heard this loud, raucous laughter. It sounded like it was right next to my car, like someone was standing beside me and went, ha 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 ha. Prayed I wouldn't have to come back for a while. 2 months later, I had to go back with 4 big boxes for them. This time, it was a pretty light day. I was breezing through deliveries pretty quickly, so I was happy about that. They're about in the middle of the route, so they're like a halfway point to me. I went to the house and was greeted by a large bull in the yard. I'm not usually nervous around animals, but a bull isn't something you want to fuck around with. He was standing just a few feet away from the fence with the basket, so I just patiently waited to see if he'd move. I didn't want to honk, lest the angry bastards who live there just happen to be home and come out to yell at me or something. I didn't want to shoo him because, honestly, I didn't think that would work. All of a sudden, this fucking bull goes "Moo," and freaks the hell out, thrashing about like someone was riding him. He came dangerously close to my car before running off into the area where the fences are. Then, a whole chorus of moos erupted from that area, and it was just a cacophony of noise. I grabbed the box and got them to the fence as fast as I could. I didn't know what spooked the bull. I honestly really didn't care. I just wanted to leave. I didn't see anything this time, but I was afraid of the bull coming back and tearing up my car or even goring me in the process. The fourth incident is honestly not the worst, but still unsettling. I had never had a package so small that it fit in the box for them. Honestly, I almost said fuck it and shoved it in the mailbox. I should have, but I didn't want them to call and complain. They hadn't on me thus far, and I wanted to keep it that way. So I reluctantly headed to the house with the package and their mail. When I got there, a single dead chicken was hanging from the awning above the porch. Weird, but honestly, it wasn't surprising. Not as surprising as the giant dressed cow hanging from the pole on the other side of the yard. I didn't notice that until I was putting the package in the basket. It's obscured by a tree when driving up to the place. As I'm walking back to the car, the chicken and the cow both start to suddenly swing. It's not windy, and even if it was, one of these things is a fucking cow. I don't think a light breeze is gonna push a cow. They're swinging back and forth, almost in tandem, and I just went, nope, and left. I wasn't gonna stay for the rest of that show. The fifth time was 2 weeks ago. It had been quite a while since I went out there, and I had vainly hoped that I wouldn't have to go back for longer, but oh well. The holidays are starting, everyone is getting shit. I get out there with 3 boxes and, for the first time, I see a living, breathing person in the window. Jen told me one of the brothers was in a wheelchair. This was that brother. He was bald, with a weird tribal tattoo across where I believe his hairline used to be, just sitting in the window, staring at me. I waved, out of courtesy, and of course, he didn't wave back. First time either of us had laid eyes on one another, but I don't know what I expected him to do. Smile back and wave? When I know damn well these guys are dicks. I noticed as I put the parcels in the basket, he wasn't looking at me, but something behind me. I looked and I saw someone walk behind one of the chicken coops. I looked back at the brother in the window, and he kind of gave me a grumpy sort of, "You saw that, right?" kind of look, and nodded toward the coop. I just kind of slowly nodded and went back to the car. He watched me back out, and as I was turning back onto the road, I saw him leave the window and draw the curtain closed. The last time was actually yesterday, and thus far, the freakiest thing next to the bull. I was having a typical holiday season Monday. Very heavy day with lots of mail and lots of parcels. And of course, they had to have a whopping 5 parcels. I get out there at about 4 p.m. or so, and I'm already exhausted, halfway done, knowing I'm not going to be home until about 7. It takes a good 45 minutes to get back to the post office, and another 10 to unload and finish my day. I know I won't finish the route until about 6 or so. So I'm just trying to hurry. Going out to this fucking place doesn't help in making good time. So I get there, get out, put some of the boxes in the basket and the others below it and go to leave. Suddenly, I feel a hard tug on my shirt that pulls me back and I fall on my ass in the dirt. I hit my head on the edge of the trailer and swear to myself before getting up. I thought I maybe just caught my shirt on something, but as I got further away, I feel another hard tug and I fall back again. This time, I know I didn't catch on anything, because I was about 2 feet from the fence on my left, and there was nothing on my right, and nothing directly behind me. I scramble up and try to run. I pull hard as I feel another tug, and I hear that god-awful laugh again. I didn't look back. I left. I still talk to Jim every now and then. When I tell him about these incidents, he goes, "Oh yeah, that place is fucking haunted. More so than some of the others, I think." In Jim's opinion, the whole route is damned. There are, as I said, other places out there where weird stuff happens. But these are the ones that I find the freakiest. After yesterday's little incident at the Hills Have Eyes house, I felt like I wanted to share these stories with someone other than my husband. Either way, I'm in a contract now, so if this is the best of the last 7 months, I'm sure I'll have a way more after these 10 years are over. Thank you for listening if you got this far. I know it's long, but I wanted to get out as much detail as I possibly could. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these true Ouija and ghost stories. Before I go any further, I would like to acknowledge the other members of Back to Ashes and the newcomers, the new listeners. Thank you all so much for your continued support, for without you, I wouldn't have a voice, and Back to Ashes would not exist. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed this collection. Until next time, please take care of yourselves. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourselves a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.